You ever meet someone who looked at you like smoke could rub off on their skin? The alarm lights painted the 32nd floor in flashes of angry red as Claire Whitmore pressed herself against the cold glass wall of her office, struggling to breathe through the smoke curling across the ceiling. Somewhere beyond the locked hallway doors, sirens echoed through downtown Chicago like distant thunder. Her throat burned. Her hands shook around the useless cell phone clutched against her chest. Then she heard footsteps. Heavy, fast, determined. The emergency door burst open through the haze, and for one suspended second, Claire thought she was hallucinating. The firefighter stepping through the smoke wore a black oxygen mask, stood across his turnout coat, broad shoulders cutting through the orange haze like something carved from the fire itself. But when he pulled the mask away slightly to speak, recognition hit her harder than the heat. Elijah Brooks, the same man she humiliated less than 12 hours earlier. His eyes met hers through the smoke. Calm, focused, not angry. Somehow, that made it worse. "Can you stand?" he asked, voice low beneath the crackling alarms. Claire opened her mouth, but the coughing came first. Pain ripped through her chest. Elijah crossed the room immediately, dropping to one knee beside her without hesitation. The hallway behind him groaned under the heat somewhere deep in the building, but his attention never shifted. Not once. "Hey," he said gently, tightening the oxygen mask over her face. "Stay with me." Claire stared at him in disbelief, the memory crashing back all at once. The ballroom, the champagne glass tipping against his uniform, the way the room had gone quiet after her voice cut through the crowd. "People like you should stay near the trucks, not near guests." She remembered the look on everyone's faces, the embarrassment she expected from him. But Elijah hadn't raised his voice, hadn't argued. He'd simply looked at her with those steady dark eyes and said, "Fire doesn't ask what someone does for a living before it spreads." And now the fire had spread. Thick smoke swallowed another section of the ceiling overhead. Claire instinctively grabbed his sleeve, panic finally breaking through the polished control she carried like armor every day of her life. Elijah adjusted his grip beneath her shoulders carefully. Professional. Steady. Like her cruel words from the night before had never happened at all. Outside the shattered office windows, snow drifted quietly over Chicago while the city below watched flames climb the side of the Whitmore Legal Tower. 12 hours earlier, the Whitmore Legal Foundation ballroom glowed gold beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's yearly rent. Waiters moved carefully through the crowd balancing champagne flutes while politicians, investors, and senior attorneys drifted beneath soft jazz and quiet conversations about power, money, and reputation. Claire Whitmore stood at the center of it all in a white tailored suit that looked sharp enough to cut glass. At 37, she had built a reputation across Chicago that made grown men rehearse before walking into her courtroom. People respected her, feared her, avoided disappointing her, but none of them noticed the exhaustion sitting quietly behind her eyes. Her phone vibrated again before she could even finish signing a document handed over by her assistant. Another client emergency. Another delayed flight. Another reminder that nobody in her life ever called unless they needed something. "Miss Whitmore, the mayor will be arriving in 10 minutes, her assistant whispered. Claire nodded without looking up. "Then make sure the press stays near the west side entrance." Across the ballroom, Elijah Brooks adjusted the straps on an oxygen tank near the temporary fire safety station positioned beside the loading corridor. His turnout jacket carried faint traces of smoke from an apartment fire earlier that morning on the south side. He should have gone home hours ago, but the department assigned 2 firefighters to remain on site during the charity gala because of the building occupancy limit. Elijah never complained about overtime. Overtime paid for groceries, school supplies, winter boots for Maya. He checked his watch. Almost 9:30. His daughter would already be asleep in their apartment back in Bronzeville, probably with one of her science books still open beside her pillow. A waiter rushed past too quickly near the center aisle, clipping the edge of Claire's champagne glass. The liquid splashed forward before anyone could react, scattering across Elijah's turnout sleeve as he stepped around the corner carrying emergency equipment. The room froze instantly. Claire looked down at the dark stain spreading across her white cuff, then lifted her eyes toward Elijah. The silence around them sharpened. People always became very quiet when wealthy people were embarrassed in public. Elijah opened his mouth first. "I am sorry, ma'am. Let me grab something to clean that. But Claire's frustration had already found somewhere to land. Long day, endless pressure, too many cameras, too many expectations pressing against her chest. And standing there in front of everyone was a tired firefighter in a smoke-stained coat reminding her that control could disappear in one careless second. "People like you should stay near the trucks," she said coldly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Not near the guests. A few uncomfortable glances shifted through the crowd. One man lowered his drink. Another pretended not to hear it. Elijah stood completely still. His face did not change. That somehow unsettled Claire more than anger would have. He reached calmly for a towel from the service cart nearby and handed it toward her assistant instead of directly to Claire. "Fire does not ask what someone does for a living before it spreads," he said quietly. Not bitter, not sarcastic, just honest. Claire gave a short laugh under her breath, dismissive and sharp. That sounded rehearsed. Elijah simply nodded once. "No, ma'am. Just learned the hard way." Then he walked back toward the service corridor while conversations slowly restarted around the ballroom. But something about the way he carried himself stayed with Claire longer than she expected. Not embarrassed, not defeated, just steady, like a man too familiar with real emergencies to care about small humiliations in expensive rooms. The rain started just after Marcus stepped out of Whitmore Tower that night. Thin at first, barely a mist against the Chicago sidewalks. Then heavier, cold enough to sting the skin beneath his collar. He pulled his worn jacket tighter and checked the time on his phone. 8:37. Layla would still be awake. She always waited for him on nights. He worked late upstairs. The train platform smelled like wet concrete and burnt coffee. Around him, people moved fast, heads down, briefcases clutched close like shields against the weather. Marcus stood still near the yellow line, Rose Whitmore's words replaying quietly in his head. Night shift, full access, not forgiveness, not trust, but something close enough to keep a man breathing easier. Across the city, Rose sat alone in her office with the lights dimmed low. The skyline stretched behind the glass walls in silver and gold reflections. Her untouched dinner had gone cold nearly an hour ago. On her desk sat the letter Marcus had written, folded carefully, creased from being opened more than once. Most people lied when cornered. Most people protected themselves first. Marcus had done the opposite. He had apologized without excuses, owned the mistake without begging for mercy. It unsettled her more than she cared to admit. Her phone buzzed again. Another board member. Another delayed merger issue. Another executive demanding numbers before sunrise. She silenced it without reading the message, then leaned back slowly in her chair. Exhaustion sat on her shoulders like wet cement. She closed her eyes for just a second. But in that silence, she remembered something strange. The way Marcus always knocked softly before entering. The way he avoided looking directly into private spaces after that first accident. The way his voice lowered whenever he spoke about his daughter. Not performative, not rehearsed. Real. Down in the maintenance corridor, Marcus unlocked the electrical room assigned to the executive floor renovation. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Tool shelves lined the walls. Old wiring diagrams curled at the corners from age. He set down his toolbox carefully and got to work replacing outdated panels near Rose's private office suite. Midnight came quietly. Most of the building had emptied by then. Just security guards, cleaning crews, the distant hum of elevators. Marcus stood on a ladder adjusting recessed lighting when he heard footsteps approach across the marble floor behind him. Sharp heels, measured pace. He glanced down carefully. Rose Whitmore stood near the doorway holding 2 paper coffee cups. Her coat hung loosely over one shoulder now, less armor than before. "You are still here," she said. Marcus stepped down from the ladder. "Job is not finished yet, ma'am." She held one cup toward him. "You drink coffee?" He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. Usually the cheap kind. A faint breath escaped her. Not quite a laugh. This building only serves expensive disappointment. Marcus accepted the cup carefully. Warmth spread into his cold hands immediately. For a moment neither spoke. Rain tapped softly against the distant windows. Somewhere far below, a siren echoed through downtown traffic. Rose looked toward the half-installed lighting above her office entrance. "You work every night?" "Mostly. That cannot leave much time for yourself." Marcus shrugged once. Single parents stop thinking like that after a while. Her eyes shifted toward him then, more directly this time. "Layla." He nodded slowly. She is 10, loves astronomy, hates homework unless it involves planets. Something softened near Rose's expression before she looked away again. I used to love astronomy too, she said quietly. Marcus seemed surprised by that. Really? My father bought me a telescope when I was 8. Her voice slowed. Careful now. Like someone opening a box untouched for years. After he died, I stopped using it. Silence settled between them again. But it no longer felt uncomfortable. Just honest. Marcus took a small sip of coffee. Bitter. Strong. Expensive exactly like she promised. Layla says stars look peaceful because they are too far away to hear people arguing, he said softly. Rose looked at him then. Fully this time. And for the first time since Marcus had entered her world by accident, the guarded CO disappeared for half a second. In her place sat a tired woman, trying very hard not to fall apart where anyone could see her. Marcus did not stare, did not press. He simply stood there holding the coffee cup with both hands like the moment deserved gentleness. And somehow, that made it worse for her heart. Because kindness without agenda was rare in buildings like this. Rare enough to feel dangerous. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and lake wind sharp enough to cut through wool coats. Marcus stood in the kitchen of his small apartment flipping pancakes while Layla sat cross-legged on the counter beside him, her science workbook open beneath a glass of orange juice. The apartment smelled like cinnamon, butter, and old radiator heat fighting to stay alive. You are smiling, Layla said suddenly, narrowing her eyes with playful suspicion. Marcus glanced over. Am I? A little. She pointed with her fork. Right there. He shook his head softly. Maybe I finally learned how to make decent pancakes. Nope. Different smile. She studied him for another second before returning to her workbook. Did something good happen at work? Marcus hesitated. Just briefly. Maybe work is getting less complicated. Layla hummed like she did not fully believe him. Children noticed more than adults liked to admit. Downtown, Whitmore Tower pulsed with its usual polished chaos. Elevator doors opened and closed in endless rhythm. Assistants rushed through hallways balancing coffee trays and tablet screens. Conference room walls glowed with financial projections and acquisition reports. But Rose Whitmore heard almost none of it. Her attention kept drifting toward the maintenance request file sitting beside her laptop. Marcus Johnson. Night access approved. Temporary executive clearance. The word should have meant nothing. Yet every time she saw his name, something quiet shifted beneath her ribs. During the 11 o'clock strategy meeting, a senior executive droned on about investor confidence and international expansion targets. Rose stared through the glass wall behind him instead. Snow had started falling lightly over the city now. Tiny white flecks against steel skyscrapers. Miss Whitmore. The voice snapped her back. Do we move forward with the Denver acquisition? Every eye in the room turned toward her. Rose blinked once. Composed herself instantly. Delay the vote 48 hours, she said calmly. Something in the numbers feels rushed. The room exchanged confused glances. Rose never delayed decisions. Never hesitated. But she had learned long ago to trust discomfort when it appeared without explanation. Late that evening, Marcus arrived for another night shift carrying a small brown paper bag tucked beneath his arm. He nodded politely to the security guard near the service entrance and stepped into the elevator. Upstairs, Rose stood alone near the coffee station outside her office reviewing contract files when she noticed him approaching down the hallway. His jacket was dusted lightly with snowflakes. Long day, he asked quietly after noticing the tiredness beneath her eyes. Rose almost answered automatically. Fine. Busy. Manageable. The usual executive armor. But something about his tone made pretending feel exhausting. Yes, she admitted instead. Marcus lifted the paper bag slightly. Then I brought backup. Her brow furrowed. Backup. He reached inside and pulled out a small container wrapped carefully in foil. Layla insisted. Rose looked genuinely confused now. What is it? Peach cobbler. A faint warmth entered his voice. My daughter says bad days improve faster with sugar. For a second, Rose simply stared at the container in his hands like no one had ever offered her something without expectation attached to it. No networking. No leverage. No hidden invoice. Just kindness carried through falling snow in a paper bag. Marcus, she said carefully, you do realize I can buy dessert anywhere in Chicago. Probably better dessert, too. That earned the smallest laugh from her. Quiet. Real. Gone almost immediately. But Marcus noticed it. So did she. He placed the container gently on the counter between them. Still figured homemade works better. Rose looked down at the foil-wrapped cobbler for a long moment. Then at him. Tell your daughter thank you. Marcus nodded once. I will. He started toward the electrical panel near her office when suddenly the overhead lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then dimmed across the entire executive floor. Both of them looked up instantly. A low electronic hum echoed through the hallway walls. Rose frowned. That has been happening all week. Marcus set down his toolbox slowly. His expression changed. Focused now. Alert in a different way. He glanced toward the security keypad beside the server corridor. That should not happen from a lighting issue, he said quietly. Somewhere deeper in the building, a system alarm beeped once before cutting off abruptly. And for the first time that week, Marcus no longer looked like a maintenance worker trying to survive another shift. He looked like a man noticing something everyone else had missed. The hallway fell strangely quiet after the alarm sound disappeared. Not silent. Buildings like Whitmore Tower were never truly silent. Air vents hummed softly behind the walls. Elevators groaned somewhere below. Distant keyboards clicked from late-night accounting departments. But something underneath the usual rhythm felt wrong now. Marcus walked slowly toward the security panel beside the server corridor, eyes narrowing at the blinking amber light near the access port. Rose followed a few steps behind him, arms crossed against the cold draft drifting through the executive floor. Can you fix it? She asked. Marcus crouched slightly near the panel without answering right away. His fingers traced the edge of the metal casing carefully. Studying. Listening. This was bypassed manually, he said at last. Rose frowned. What does that mean? Means electrical failures do not usually leave clean override marks. He pointed toward a nearly invisible scratch beside the keypad lock. Somebody forced an internal reset. Her posture stiffened immediately. You think someone inside the company caused this? Marcus stood slowly again. I think somebody wanted the cameras down for at least 30 seconds. The words landed heavily between them. Rose glanced instinctively toward the dark security camera mounted above the hallway intersection. The tiny red indicator light had gone black. For the first time all evening, genuine unease crossed her face. Whitmore Tower was built like a fortress. Security teams, encrypted systems, executive protocols. Yet suddenly the polished building around her felt thinner somehow. More vulnerable. Marcus opened his toolbox and removed a small flashlight. When did the glitches start? 3 days ago. Always at night. Rose nodded slowly. Usually after 8. He absorbed that quietly. Thinking. The flashlight beam moved carefully across the access panel while snow continued drifting outside the floor to ceiling windows behind them. Most people would not notice something this small, Rose admitted after a moment. Marcus gave a faint shrug. Most people are not trained to survive by noticing small things. She looked at him then. Really looked. There was no arrogance in his voice. No attempt to impress her. Just truth worn smooth by difficult years. Before she could answer, the elevator doors opened suddenly at the far end of the hallway. A man in an expensive navy coat stepped out holding a leather briefcase against his side. Mid-40s. Perfect haircut. Perfect smile that never quite reached his eyes. Marcus immediately stepped aside respectfully. But Rose's expression cooled several degrees. Ethan, she said flatly. The man approached with easy confidence. Still working this late? His gaze shifted briefly toward Marcus near the exposed panel. And who is this? Maintenance, Rose replied. Ethan's eyes lingered on Marcus for half a second too long. Measuring him. Dismissing him. You really should let professionals handle security problems, he said lightly. Marcus remained calm. Just checking the wiring, sir. Right. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks slowly. Would not want the janitor solving corporate espionage now. The insult floated into the hallway wrapped in casual amusement. Rose's jaw tightened immediately, but Marcus simply closed his toolbox. Steady, unbothered on the surface. Sometimes small leaks sink expensive ships, he said quietly. Ethan gave a short laugh, without humor. Interesting philosophy. Rose stepped forward before the tension could stretch further. Why are you here tonight? Ethan turned toward her smoothly again. Board revisions. Investors are nervous. At nearly 10 o'clock? Success does not sleep, Rose. His smile returned, polished and empty. Then he glanced once more toward the disabled security panel before walking toward the executive offices. Marcus watched him disappear down the hallway without speaking. Rose exhaled slowly after the office door shut behind Ethan. He sits on the board, she explained. My father trusted him. Marcus looked back at the damaged panel. Do you? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth automatically. Stopped. Thought about it. I honestly do not know anymore, she admitted softly. Marcus nodded once like a man who understood uncertainty better than comfort. Then his flashlight beam paused suddenly near the lower edge of the panel casing. Wedged almost invisibly behind the wiring sat a tiny black device no bigger than a coin. Marcus stared at it carefully. Rose stepped closer. What is that? His voice lowered. Calm. Serious now. Not maintenance equipment. He removed it gently between two fingers and held it beneath the hallway light. A tracking transmitter, hidden deep enough that nobody would notice unless they were looking for it. Rose felt the air leave her lungs slowly, because suddenly the flickering lights were no longer just a technical issue, and the quiet man standing beside her no longer looked like someone repairing a building. He looked like the only person in the tower actually paying attention. Rose stared at the tiny device resting in Marcus's palm as if the building beneath her feet had suddenly shifted an inch off balance. The transmitter looked harmless. Cheap even. Just black plastic and a blinking green dot no larger than a grain of rice. But something about its hidden placement made the air feel colder around them. Can it access company files? She asked quietly. Marcus turned the device over carefully beneath the flashlight beam. Not directly, but it can piggyback signal traffic, track movement, pull fragments from unsecured systems. Rose folded her arms tighter across herself. You are telling me somebody planted surveillance equipment inside my executive floor. Looks that way. He slipped the device into a small evidence bag from his toolbox with calm precision. Rose noticed how steady his hands remained. No panic, no dramatics, just focus. You seem unusually familiar with this, she said after a moment. Marcus lowered the flashlight slowly. For the first time since she met him, hesitation crossed his face. Brief, almost invisible. I worked security systems years ago, he answered carefully. Before maintenance work. Rose studied him closely now. There was more in that sentence than he wanted to explain. She could feel it. But before she could ask further, her office phone rang sharply from down the hallway. The sound echoed through the executive floor like broken glass in still water. Rose glanced toward her office. I need to take that. Marcus nodded once. I will check the remaining panels. She walked away slowly, heels softer now against the marble than they used to sound. Inside her office, the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the windows while her phone continued ringing across the desk. She answered on the fourth ring. Rose Whitmore speaking. Miss Whitmore. Her assistant's voice sounded tense. I am sorry to bother you this late, but finance just flagged unusual transfers through one of the inactive subsidiaries. Rose's posture straightened immediately. How unusual. Large enough to trigger automatic review. A pause. Nearly $2 million. The room seemed to narrow around her. Freeze the account, she said instantly. And do not discuss this with anyone until morning. She hung up slowly, then stood motionless beside her desk while snow drifted beyond the glass. Flickering security systems. Hidden transmitters. Missing money. None of it felt random anymore. Out in the hallway, Marcus removed another access panel near the executive conference room. His expression remained calm, but his instincts had already shifted into something sharper. Years ago, before life collapsed into layoffs and custody battles and overdue rent, he had spent 4 years subcontracting cybersecurity maintenance for federal buildings. Quiet work, long hours, mostly invisible. Exactly the kind of work where noticing small irregularities mattered more than titles on office doors. He rarely spoke about that period anymore. People heard, maintenance worker, and stopped asking questions. Easier that way. Safer too. As Marcus adjusted a wiring cluster near the server relay, he heard footsteps approaching again. Not Rose this time. Slower. Heavier. Ethan. Still here? Ethan asked casually from behind him. Marcus stepped down from the ladder. Just finishing the diagnostics, sir. Ethan glanced briefly at the exposed wiring. You know, Whitmore Tower pays people very well to handle technical problems. His tone stayed polite. Too polite. I would hate for someone unqualified to make assumptions. Marcus met his gaze evenly. Sometimes fresh eyes catch things familiar eyes miss. Ethan smiled faintly at that. But there was tension behind it now. Careful, he said softly. Buildings like this can become very uncomfortable for people who overstep. Marcus did not react outwardly, but something in Ethan's voice confirmed what his instincts already suspected. The man was nervous, and nervous people revealed themselves in tiny ways. Tightened jaw, controlled breathing, forced smiles arriving half a second too late. Ethan adjusted his coat sleeve again. "Good night, Mr. Johnson." "Good night, sir." Marcus watched him disappear toward the private elevators before slowly looking down at the access panel again. Hidden deep behind the lower wiring sat another transmitter identical to the first. His jaw tightened slightly. Two devices meant coordination, planning, intent. Back inside her office, Rose stood by the window holding her father's old silver letter opener absent-mindedly between her fingers. The city below looked beautiful from 40 stories up. Distant headlights, falling snow, tiny lives moving through the dark. But for the first time in years, she did not feel protected by height or wealth or glass walls. She felt watched. Then came a soft knock at her office door. Marcus stepped inside holding the second evidence bag carefully at his side. Rose looked at it once and exhaled slowly. "There is another one." "Yes, ma'am." Silence stretched between them. "Heavy now?" "Real." Then Marcus said something quietly that made her pulse slow for reasons she could not explain. "You should not stay here alone tonight." Not fear, not flirtation, just concern spoken plainly by a man who had nothing to gain from offering it. And somehow that made her trust it more than anything she had heard inside Whitmore Tower in years. Rose looked at Marcus across the quiet office, the second transmitter resting between them like proof that the world she trusted was beginning to crack from the inside. Snow continued falling beyond the glass walls, soft and endless against the Chicago skyline. "I cannot leave," she said finally, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Not tonight." Marcus nodded once as if he expected that answer. "Then at least do not stay alone on this floor." She leaned back slowly against the edge of her desk. "You really think I am in danger?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "I think somebody is willing to take risks inside your company. People do not hide devices in executive walls for harmless reasons." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than fear would have. Most people around Rose softened difficult truths before bringing them to her. Marcus did the opposite. Not cruelly, just directly. She rubbed a hand lightly across her forehead, exhaustion finally catching up beneath the sharp lines of her posture. "I built this company with my father," she said quietly. "Half the people on that board watched me grow up." Marcus remained silent, letting her speak. "And now I sit here wondering who is stealing from me. Sometimes betrayal comes dressed like familiarity," he said softly. The sentence lingered in the room long after he finished speaking. Rose looked toward him again. "You speak like someone who learned that the hard way." A faint shadow crossed his expression. Most adults do eventually. Before she could ask more, her office lights flickered once again. Then the main monitor on her desk flashed black. A second later, lines of distorted code rippled across the screen before vanishing completely. Rose straightened instantly. That should not happen. Marcus moved beside the desk quickly now, eyes fixed on the monitor ports. "Someone is probing your internal network. Can they access financial files? If security routing is compromised, yes." Rose reached for her phone immediately. "I am calling IT." Marcus gently stopped her with a quiet word. "Do not." She looked up sharply. "Why?" "Because if somebody inside the company planted those transmitters, they may already know who handles your security alerts." The realization settled heavily over her features. Distrust changed a room faster than darkness ever could. Marcus unplugged the network cable from the monitor and inspected the blinking router beneath the desk. "You have off-site backups. Encrypted servers in Denver." "Good." His movement stayed calm, efficient, like a man used to pressure without panic. Rose watched him closely now, this quiet maintenance worker kneeling beside her desk while billion-dollar systems failed around them. Nothing about him matched the role people assigned him at first glance. "Marcus," she asked carefully, "why are you really doing maintenance work?" He paused briefly, not offended, just tired maybe. "Because life does not always leave room for pride." The answer carried years inside it. Layoffs, courtrooms, hospital bills, sleepless nights. Rose could hear all of it without him saying another word. He stood slowly again. "I had a cybersecurity contract position before my wife got sick." Rose's expression softened immediately. "I did not know." Most people do not ask. Silence followed. Gentle this time. Human. Then Marcus glanced toward the dark hallway outside her office. You should probably call home. Let someone know where you are. Rose looked down at her silent phone resting beside the contracts on her desk. There is no one waiting for me at home. The words came out quieter than she intended. Marcus did not answer right away. He simply nodded once with the kind of understanding that hurt more than pity. Layla waits up sometimes, he said eventually. Even when I tell her not to. Rose gave the smallest smile. Fragile but real. You talk about your daughter like she keeps the world balanced. Some days she does. The office lights steadied briefly overhead. Outside, wind pushed snow harder against the glass towers surrounding Whitmore Plaza. Somewhere below them, the city kept moving. Taxis, trains, restaurants closing for the night. Ordinary lives unfolding beneath extraordinary silence. Then Marcus's eyes shifted suddenly toward Rose's bookshelf near the far wall. His expression sharpened. Do not move. Her pulse quickened instantly. What is it? He crossed the office slowly and reached behind a framed company photo taken years earlier during her father's retirement ceremony. Hidden beneath the shelf sat a third transmitter. Smaller this time. More advanced. Marcus removed it carefully while Rose stared in disbelief. This one has audio capability, he said quietly. The room turned ice cold around her. Because suddenly every private conversation she had inside this office felt exposed. Every strategy meeting. Every vulnerable moment. Watched. Recorded. And standing there beneath the dim office lights, Rose Whitmore realized the only person she truly trusted in that building was the man everyone else kept underestimating. The clock on Rose's office wall read 11:14 when the storm outside finally thickened into heavy snow. Chicago disappeared behind a curtain of white and silver, the streets below reduced to faint headlights drifting through darkness like distant ships at sea. Inside Whitmore Tower, the executive floor had gone unnaturally still. Most employees were long gone. Even the elevators seemed quieter now. Rose sat behind her desk with her father's old fountain pen turning slowly between her fingers while Marcus examined the third transmitter beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp. 3 devices on one floor, she said quietly. That is not random. Marcus nodded. No, ma'am. His eyes stayed fixed on the circuitry inside the tiny device. This one is newer than the others too. Meaning whoever planted it upgraded recently. Rose leaned back slowly in her chair. Fatigue pressed into her shoulders harder now. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. The kind that arrived when certainty began collapsing piece by piece. I used to think control meant safety, she admitted softly. Money. Lawyers. Locked offices. Security teams. Marcus glanced toward her. Did it help? A tired smile touched her mouth for half a second. Not tonight. He placed the transmitter carefully beside the others on her desk. Real safety usually comes from people, not systems. The sentence settled quietly between them. Rose looked down at the collection of hidden devices beside billion-dollar contracts and polished executive reports. Such small things to hold so much damage. Her gaze shifted toward Marcus again. His sleeves remained rolled neatly at the wrists. His toolbox sat open beside the couch. Calm, grounded, present. Strange how the building felt steadier when he was inside it. You should eat something, he said after noticing the untouched dinner tray near her desk. Rose blinked like the thought had not occurred to her in hours. I forgot. That happens when stress gets loud. He reached for the foil container Layla had packed earlier and placed it gently beside her laptop. Peach Cobbler still works on conspiracy nights. A soft breath escaped her. Almost a laugh again. Your daughter sounds wiser than most executives I know. She charges reasonable consulting fees too. That earned a real smile this time. Small but undeniable. Marcus noticed the change immediately, though he pretended not to. Outside the office windows, snow pressed harder against the glass. Marcus checked the time on his phone and frowned slightly. Layla is probably still awake. Rose looked up. You should go home. He hesitated. Not because he wanted to stay. Because leaving her alone no longer felt right. Rose noticed that too. I will be fine, she said quietly. Marcus considered her for a long moment before nodding once. Lock your office door tonight. I will. And do not mention the transmitters to anyone until you know who you trust. That list is getting shorter. He understood that feeling more than she realized. Marcus closed his toolbox slowly, then paused near the office doorway. Rose, It was the first time he had said her name without title or distance attached to it. She looked up immediately. Yes. You do not have to carry all of this alone. The words landed softly. No pressure behind them. No hidden meaning. Just quiet truth from a man who recognized loneliness when he saw it sitting across from him. Rose felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. Because nobody had spoken to her like that in years. Not board members. Not investors. Not old friends drifting through charity galas and corporate dinners. They admired her success. Envied her position. Needed things from her. But Marcus looked at her like exhaustion mattered more than status. Like she was human before she was powerful. Good night, Marcus, she said softly. Good night, Rose. He disappeared into the hallway a second later, footsteps fading gradually against marble floors. The office felt larger after he left. Colder too. Rose sat alone for several minutes, staring at the snow outside, while the peach cobbler cooled beside her keyboard. Finally, she opened the container and took a small bite. Cinnamon. Brown sugar. Warmth. Homemade in a way expensive restaurants never understood. Her phone buzzed suddenly across the desk, breaking the quiet. An anonymous message flashed across the screen. 3 words only. Stop asking questions. Rose's pulse slowed instead of rising. Strange. A few days ago the message might have frightened her. Tonight it only sharpened something inside her. Because for the first time in a very long while, she no longer felt completely alone inside Whitmore Tower. Down in the lobby, Marcus stepped into the falling snow and pulled his coat tighter against the wind. But before he reached the sidewalk, he stopped suddenly. Across the street, inside a dark sedan parked beneath a dead street lamp, someone was watching the building. Watching the executive floor specifically. And the moment Marcus noticed the silhouette behind the windshield, the car pulled away without headlights into the storm. Marcus stood beneath the falling snow for several seconds after the sedan disappeared into the night traffic. Wind curled through the empty downtown streets, carrying the sharp scent of ice and exhaust smoke. Most people would have dismissed the moment. Just another car. Another stranger parked too long beneath a street lamp. But Marcus had spent too many years learning how danger behaved before it arrived openly. And that car had moved the instant it realized it had been noticed. He glanced back up toward the glowing windows of Whitmore Tower. 40 stories above him, one office light still burned against the storm. Rose was still there, alone. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket before he could think further. Daddy. Layla's sleepy voice came softly through the speaker. Marcus's expression eased immediately. Hey, Pumpkin. Are you still working? Just heading home now. A pause. You sound worried. He smiled faintly despite himself. You always notice that. Because you get quiet when something feels wrong. Children really did notice everything. Marcus looked once more toward the tower windows glowing against the snow. I am okay. Did the peach cobbler help your friend? The question caught him off guard slightly. Maybe. Good. Her voice yawned softly through the phone. People act less mean when they eat dessert. Marcus laughed quietly under his breath. Go back to sleep. Drive safe. I will. The call ended, leaving only the wind and distant traffic humming through the city. Upstairs, Rose remained seated at her desk staring at the anonymous message glowing across her phone screen. Stop asking questions. Such simple words. Yet they changed the shape of the room around her. She rose slowly and crossed toward the office windows, wrapping her arms lightly around herself as snow swallowed the streets below. Her father used to say power attracted 2 kinds of people, the loyal and the hungry. For years she believed she could tell the difference. Now she was no longer certain. Her eyes drifted toward the peach cobbler container still resting beside the contracts on her desk. Homemade. Uneven crust. Too much cinnamon probably. Yet somehow it felt more honest than every polished executive dinner she had attended all year. Her phone rang suddenly again. This time Ethan's name flashed across the screen. Rose stared at it for 2 full rings before answering. It is late, she said calmly. Ethan's voice arrived smooth as ever. Still at the office? Why? Just checking on you. Snowstorm is getting worse. Rose's gaze hardened slightly toward the dark skyline. Interesting timing. A pause flickered through the line. Tiny. Careful. What is that supposed to mean? Nothing. Her tone stayed level. Good night, Ethan. She ended the call before he could answer further. Then she stood motionless for several seconds listening to the silence inside her office. Finally, she crossed toward the bookshelf where Marcus had found the hidden transmitter. Her fingers brushed lightly across the polished wood. Someone had been listening to her for weeks, maybe longer, watching, waiting. And somehow the only person who made her feel safe inside that building was a quiet maintenance worker carrying a dented toolbox and a photograph of his daughter in his wallet. Down on the subway platform, Marcus waited beneath flickering fluorescent lights while snow blew sideways through the open tracks. His train was delayed. Again. Around him, exhausted commuters stared into phones or paper coffee cups with tired eyes. But Marcus barely noticed them. His thoughts stayed fixed on Rose alone in that office tower above the city. Then his phone buzzed once more. Unknown number this time. Marcus hesitated before opening the message. Attached was a single photograph. Grainy. Taken from across the street only minutes earlier. Rose standing alone beside her office window. Beneath the photo sat one sentence. Tell Miss Whitmore to stop digging before somebody gets hurt. Marcus felt the cold settle deeper into his bones then. Not panic. Something quieter. More dangerous. Resolve. Because whoever sent the message had made one mistake tonight. They assumed Marcus Johnson was just another invisible man cleaning up after powerful people. They had no idea how fiercely a tired father could fight once he decided someone deserved protecting.